Well, in the historic church calendar, the Feast of Epiphany is January 6th. And Epiphany Sunday is the Sunday closest to that, which is today. So today is the last of our Christmas sermon series, which I'm a little sad to see go, but I'm so grateful. We've had a beautiful season here together as a church community. And I think it's gonna linger with me. It's gonna stay with me a little longer, I think, than it usually does. But I've loved this season in our church community. And starting next week, we're gonna have 2 or 3 weeks of conversations up here, as opposed to sermons, that are significant for our church going into this year. And that's all I'm gonna say about them at this point, but I hope you won't miss those. So Epiphany, the word epiphaneia in Greek means unveiling, or literally to shine forth. So historically, Epiphany has been connected with Jesus' baptism, the wedding at Cana, and the visit of the Magi, because in all of those stories, Jesus goes from being incognito to being recognized, to being unveiled. And so the feast actually goes back really far. The Feast of Epiphany goes back to the 2nd century in the Eastern Church, and it goes back to the 4th century in the Western Church, which is who we are all descended from, the Western Church, and we're always a little slow on the uptake in the Western Church. So it took us a couple more centuries. And increasingly over the years, the Epiphany became connected to the story of the Magi, and I would like to read that to you. The whole thing is just 12 verses in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2. And this is what Matthew tells us. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men, Magi, from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is written by the prophet." And then he quotes from Micah the words, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." And the rest of that verse, by the way, if you read it in Micah, says, "Whose goings forth are from the days of eternity." A little hint about Jesus. And then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me so that I may come and worship him also." Don't you hate a snake? And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country by another way. Now, there's a lot that goes on in the stories in the Gospels, around the birth of Jesus. But this is perhaps the most mysterious story. By the way, did anyone catch my nod to the Magi as you came into the sanctuary this morning? Anybody know what I'm talking about? This is the ancient practice of chalking the door on Epiphany, and it dates back to the early medieval period. Does anybody know what it means? Wow. Oh, Deb. So I will tell you what it means. Really, one person? Okay. This is history lesson day. Obviously, it's the beginning of 2025, and the C, M, and B stand for the names in tradition that were given to the Magi, Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar. But then they also came to mean, in the Western Church, they came to be an alliteration for a New Year's blessing. So the C, M, and B are Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar, but in Latin are the first letters of Christus Mansionem Benedicat, which is, may Christ bless this house. And I thought, and so people would put this over their door, they would chalk their door. And I only learned about it because I went to my parents' house in California many years ago, and on the top of their door, on the inside of the door actually, going out onto the deck, I saw the year, which I kind of pieced that together, and this CM and B, and I'm like, Mom, what is this? You know, and why are you writing in chalk on your door, you know? But I kind of thought, like, when my mind went back to that this year, I thought, it got me thinking about these recent years, this last couple of years and everything that led to it, and kind of what I can honestly only call sort of the transformation in our church community. And I thought, as I was thinking about, I guess, our communal house, our community here at LifeSpring, I just wanted to say, Christ bless this house as we go into this year. Now, we're so used to hearing this story about the Magi that we just kind of go, oh yeah, the Magi, or sometimes they're called the three kings. There's nothing that says they were kings. But what we should be doing is going, why are these guys even in the story? Like, they're not Jewish. In all likelihood, they came from Persia, which is modern-day Iran, and they traveled 800 to 900 miles to come and see this infant child. We know that this is where they came from because the ancient word magi, is connected to the priests and sages of the religion known as Zoroastrianism. Now, you think of Iran as Muslim today, but long before it was Muslim, they were adherents of the religion of a priest named Zarathustra, or in Greek, Zoroaster. And this was about 600 years. Zarathustra lived about 600 years before Jesus. And Zoroastrians believed that there was ultimately only one high deity, who, unlike the other petty deities, was completely good and benevolent, but he was opposed by an evil spirit who was out to destroy human beings. But they believed that in the end, this one benevolent deity and his goodness would triumph over evil for the good of human beings. Does that sound familiar? You're like they didn't know Bethlehem and they didn't know Jesus, but they had it going on. Like they had, however that happened, you know, God reveals himself. So these guys, you know, they were spiritual seekers, probably from Persia's nobility, probably teachers of Zoroastrian wisdom. And we know from their short appearance in Matthew's gospel that they believed there were clues in the stars. And it's a great mystery how they connected the appearance of a specific star to the birth. It is known that the images and meanings of some of the constellations crossed cultural boundaries. So different countries in the ancient world, a lot of them held to very similar images for the constellations. And so some people have theorized that this was a new star that appeared in a meaningful constellation, perhaps in the constellation of the Virgin. I'm a Virgo. It's good to belong to the right group. On Epiphany, I'm just saying. I'm in the right denomination, the right constellation denomination. But I'll tell you this about the story. It's too weird a story to not be true. You know, if you wanted to convince Jews, you know, Matthew is a Jew. Of all the four Gospels, Matthew is the one trying to tell Jews, like, this is the guy, Jesus, right? If you want to convince Jews, you don't bring in a bunch of foreign Gentiles and say they're the big ones testifying to Jesus. It's almost offensive. God takes on human flesh and he slips into the world in a barn or a cave in Bethlehem, and these foreigners from 1,000 miles away know it, but the Jewish scribes and Pharisees 20 miles away in Jerusalem don't have a clue. That's offensive. Did you catch the part where Matthew says that when Herod heard this, he was troubled and all Jerusalem with him? Well, yeah. How come these Gentiles dogs know about it and we don't? These guys come into Jerusalem going like, hey, we heard, you know, and they're like, we haven't heard anything about this, you know? But what really amazes me is that the Magi packed up and went. And I want to point out to you something that I don't think we think about with them very often. They were looking for God, and their searching included looking in places beyond their culture and religion. That seems pretty radical to me. Now, I don't know if ancient Zoroastrians, I'm not an expert, I don't know if they had a sense of exclusivity in their religion, like, hey, our religion is true and nobody else knows what's going on. But I do know that a lot of modern religious people, including Christians, Muslims, and lots of other people, that's how we think. Like, hey, we got it going on. We don't look anywhere else because God is just in our group with this, in our religion doing this thing. And can you picture these guys telling their Persian friends and families, hey, God is manifesting himself in the world and we're going to find him, but it's not in our group? Imagine a Christian saying that today. Hey, God is manifesting in the world and we're going to find him, but it's not in our group. Everybody would be like, oh no. No, absolutely not, right? These guys were ecumenical before Christians ever knew that was a thing, right? So many Christians today have been told to lock God down in their Bibles and their doctrines and their group so tightly that they don't know that God is beautifully wild and free, and that we don't tell God where to show up or who to talk to or who to reveal himself to. Absolutely not. And I think there are some cool parallels between their journey and ours. I just want to try to use Epiphany today to unpack a couple of those for you. The first one is kind of what I already mentioned, the simple fact that they went, that they embarked, that they packed the camels and started a journey with an unclear destination. You understand, they didn't know where they were going. They were following a star. They left town, like, which way are we going? Wherever the star is going, I guess that's where we're going. And interestingly enough, this is exactly what a lot of you have done. At some point, you saw something. You heard something. Something inside you was pushing you, and something way bigger than you was pulling you. And you began a journey to find God. And it's had its ups and downs. Maybe you gave up and traveled a side road for a while. Lord knows I did in my younger years. But you're here this morning, aren't you? Do you ever look back and feel kind of amazed? If you think of yourself as a person on a spiritual journey, and I can't read your minds, I don't know if you do, but if you do and you feel like you've been on a spiritual journey, do you ever look back and feel kind of amazed that you ever set out? Now, I was raised in church by parents who had a real love for God, but by 15 I was rebellious, and I was on drugs, and I was afraid, which I turned into the false courage of fights and breaking and entering and stealing cars and anything else adventurous that I thought made me strong. But most of all, I was empty. And between the beginning of September and the end of October 1976, and I know if you weren't alive in 1976, I don't want to hear about it. But between the beginning of September and the end of October 1976, I heard about the crucified love of God. I mean, I'd seen it in church, but I heard about it in a way that spoke to me, and that's a whole nother story. And I intuitively realized that what I needed had to be bigger than myself, which it was a new thought for me. In fact, just before I really came to faith, somebody said to me, maybe you're looking for God. And I said, no, that's not it. Definitely not that. I'm looking for something, but that's not it. And honestly, so I thought I need something bigger than myself. And I heard about, this crucified love, this God that hung on a cross. And I saw the star and I packed my bags. Like, I made the decision. I have to take this journey. And honestly, I look back now on that 15-year-old boy who knew nothing of his own soul and knew not a single thing about life, but who made what now seems like an almost irrationally monumental decision to load up the camel and go, and I'm amazed. It changed my whole life. And I had no idea where I was going. Like, something happened. I became aware of something, and I said, I have to follow this. And honestly, I don't know who I'd be today if that had not happened. I love this quote about the Magi from the theologian Karl Rahner, one of these Vatican II guys I've kind of fallen in love with. He says that as the Magi set off, quote, they probably are a little frightened by their own courage and would have preferred that their noble principles of theoretical reasoning had not ended up looking so surreal and impractical. Like, right? These guys are kind of like astrological scientists blended with sort of spiritual wisdom, and they've got this idea that something's going to happen in the world, and they're watching for some sign about it, right? And then, maybe they were aware it was a Jewish thing. We don't know. But then they're watching the sky, and then somehow all that converges, and they go, this is it, let's go. But what do they really know? Not a lot. And so I picture them being like, let's go. And then there's like a 10-second pause and they go, are we really going to do this? Like, is this rational? Does this make any sense that we're just gonna set off like this? And I think about them for 800, 900 miles passing through the villages of the Jewish countryside where people would be lucky to have a donkey. And here they are. They're foreigners. They don't speak the language. They probably got camels loaded down. And people are looking at them and wondering, where are you guys going? You don't even belong here. And I think you've had this experience too, many of you. You've had people, perhaps have people in your life who do not understand the journey that you are on also. You know, when I first packed up my camels at age 15, my older brothers were like, where is he going? And they, I don't know, he saw a star. Really my oldest brother had moved to California. He was 19, I was 15. And after I got on this journey, I like that metaphor. Like I loaded up my camels, It's time to go somewhere new. And I remember talking to my brother on the phone. And I said, hi, Joe, how you doing? And he goes, hey, I heard you got religion or something, little brother. What is going on, And so you're always going to have these people, they don't understand. The people that you pass along the way, they don't all understand your journey. But you don't need to judge them, because what you need to know is that in time, they will hear the call to come and see. Maybe they haven't heard it yet. Maybe they're not ready yet. But the heart that has glimpsed that possibility of finding God is not dissuaded. I mean, look back across the years of your own journey. You're still on the journey, aren't you? You've maybe wandered away, you've taken a side road, and you find yourself drawn back like you can't let it go. You can't quit God. I like something my friend Diane Alich has often said, which she's like, once you've seen it and you tasted it, there's nowhere else to go. Like you can wander away and you can say, I'm just going to build my life on these things. I'm just going to be a workaholic, or I'm just going to have the best clothes, best vacations, best cars I can, or I'm going to do this or that. I'm just going to fill up my life with busyness so I don't have to think about any of these soul things, any of these deep things. And then you can't let it go. Because the heart knows what the heart knows. I tried to quit a few times when I was younger. But whenever I wasn't moving toward God, there was that emptiness again. I'm fascinated by the different things that pull people onto the journey. Have you ever thought about that? Like everybody in this room, or most of the people in this room, are on some kind of a journey with God. Certainly a journey in life, a journey of the heart, something. How does that start for people? Well, for some people, it starts out of pain. Like they're looking for, there's got to be somebody who can help with the pain that life has brought to me. There's got to be something better, or some kind of healing, or some kind of hope in the midst of all of this. And for other people, it's being challenged about what's true, and they get drawn into taking a hard look at Christ. Like somebody says, hey, Christ is the answer. He's the secret of life. He's the one. And so they're like, they're going through kind of a reasoning process about that. For some people, it's simply the spiritual hunger and restlessness, like knowing that there must be, like some of us had an innate sense, even subconscious, that there must be something out there meant to fill this vacuum in the soul. But even if it's pain or it's intellectual questions that draw us onto the journey, I think that the heart, maybe not consciously, but I think in the depth of a human being, the heart actually always knows what it's really seeking. The heart is seeking to be alive in a way that it can't manufacture by itself. We try that and then it doesn't work. The heart is seeking a joy that all the other joys whisper about but can't quite get us up to. The heart is seeking a home not for the body but for the soul. I was thinking about that. I was wondering if that's why we make homes. Homes, there's a difference between shelter and home, isn't there? Right? If you just need shelter, you slap together a few boards and you say, all right, the rain's keeping off us and that's good enough. But we don't do that, do we? We make homes. Right? With floors and walls, and we pick paint colors, and we put up a lot of Christmas decorations. These guys, Linda and Diane were saying last night, we're looking at each other's Christmas decorations in their houses. They were saying that they were going to start a support group for people. And I said, no. A support group is for people who want to get better. You guys don't want to get better. But I was wondering, seriously, like, is this something like, is this why we make homes? Because we're looking for a home, and home in the house you live in is wonderful. But I think maybe it's a symptom of the fact that even in our homes, we still know we aren't home. We still aren't all the way home. And the heart is looking for that home, that place of rest and peace and joy. And here's the crazy thing. Human beings, we know this exists, that these things are out there, which is why everybody, even if they don't call it God, it's why everybody's looking for it. Christians make a mistake sometimes. We look out at the world and we say, nobody's looking for God. Nobody wants God. Everybody's looking for God. Because everybody's looking for what it is, and for hope, and for meaning, and for joy, and for what home really is. They just know it because the heart knows. It reminds me of that passage in Ecclesiastes 3 where the writer says, He has made all things beautiful in their time, and He has set eternity in the hearts of human beings. And then they come to Bethlehem, and then they go. I mean, have you ever thought about that? They came, they saw, and then that was it. They went home, they found God, and then they went home. And you never hear about them again. So what did they find? I was thinking about this, and it makes me think, you probably think this is a stupid analogy, but it makes me think of that final scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I don't know if you remember that, but if you saw that movie, you probably did. Everybody saw that movie, right? If you didn't, go watch it today. You remember the final scene, the whole cave that they're in is like crumbling, and everything's crashing down, and the ground is splitting, and these big chasms are opening up, and there's boulders, tumbling everywhere, and all this debris. And the cup of Christ, the cup from the Last Supper, falls into one of these chasms that's opened up, and it's sitting on a ledge. And Indiana Jones he's trying to reach it. So he's like reaching down into this chasm, and it's just out of reach, and he's trying to get it. He's reaching. And finally his father looks at him and he says, Indiana, let it go. And he does. And then when they're outside, very end of the movie, they're outside, and there's this final kind of scene where Sean Connery, talking about the young Jewish woman who's a main character in the story, he says, Elsa never believed in the Grail. She thought she'd found a prize. And Harrison Ford looks at him, Indiana Jones character, he looks at him and he says, Dad, what did you find? And Sean Connery says, me? And he pauses and he thinks and he says, illumination. And every time I see that scene, I think, that is it. The Magi go off to live the rest of their lives with illumination. Here's what they now know, that what their hearts knew had to be there. The bigger mystery to everything around them and everything inside them was in fact there. It was. And everything would look different from that point on. Most of you have had your Bethlehems. For some of you, your first Bethlehem might still lay ahead of you. Maybe it would be this morning. Wouldn't that be something? For most of us, there will probably be more Bethlehems. Your Bethlehems have been those times. Maybe it was an encounter you had with God, which could come in an awful lot of ways. Or maybe it was some lining up of circumstances, some circumstance. I've had a handful of these that you just couldn't explain. In fact, you tried to figure out how it could be a coincidence, how you could explain it naturally, and then you said to yourself, the odds are just too weird. They're just too weird. There's no way. Or maybe it was when God met you in some sorrow or in some beauty, because God will meet you in both. Or maybe it was some supernatural experience of his presence, or maybe it was some truth that suddenly became real. Many of you know what I'm talking about, where you'd heard something maybe you'd read it in your Bible, but it wasn't real to you one moment. And then you had an epiphania, and all of a sudden it was true. And in however you've experienced it, in these things, all of a sudden, Christ was right there before you, just like he was before the Magi. And you laid down the gold of your love and the frankincense of your longing and the myrrh of your pain before him, because even though you had no words for it, you knew that God was both the beginning and the end of all of those. But then you had to journey again, just like the Magi, and we hate that sometimes, don't we? Right? A lot of times I think when we first come to faith and our hearts come alive to God, we go, everything is going to be perfect from now on. And then, about a year later, you come to your pastor and you go, what's going on? Am I doing something wrong? Because, life still got stuff, it reminds me of, Peter on the Mount of Transfiguration. We see the glory for a few moments and then we say, Lord, let's build some tabernacles and stay right here and never leave. And Jesus is like, yeah, no. But part of the mystery of tasting the divine, of your heart discovering, yes, it's true, there's an answer for all this longing, all this sadness, even an answer to all these good but lesser joys. Part of the mystery of that is then to live your life knowing that just as God was in your longings and your pain and your joys, God is in everything. He's in every piece of creation. He's in every person. He's in every relationship. He's in you. And you didn't know that before Bethlehem. I think part of the mystery is that once we embark on the journey, we come to Bethlehem and we come to Golgotha, the place of the cross, again and again and again. And then we carry the mystery of the incarnate one and the mystery of suffering love inside of us and with us into every relationship now and into every circumstance of life. And just like the Magi, everything looks different after that. I think of how Brother Paul writes about these things in his letters. I love Paul because he's so honest. He still has longing. He still has questions. He still has pain. He still has his sense of not being all the way home. He writes about it in those terms. He says, we're waiting to be home, and while we're in this tent, we are still groaning. He talks about all these things, but then he also tells us that everything has changed. Listen to this. This is from 2 Corinthians 4. For it is God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has now shown in our hearts to give us the light of the understanding of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. We have looked on the face of Christ wherever we've seen it. In the manger, Jesus loving and healing and forgiving on the roadside, from the cross, eating fish with the disciples after his resurrection. We looked on the face of Christ and we said, oh my gosh, God is not who I thought he was. Look at how glorious. Then Paul says this, but, you always got to watch out for the buts. But we have this treasure, the glory of God we've seen in the face of Christ. We have it, Paul says, in these earthen vessels, or one translation says, in these ordinary clay pots of us. Right? So that the excellence of this power might be shown to be not of us, but from God. Now listen, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Now when you hear these things, Paul says, you have to step into them and be a little defiant in your soul. We are hard pressed, but we are not crushed. We will not be crushed. We are perplexed, but we are not in despair. We will not give in. We are persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying around in our body the dying of the Lord Jesus. This is so mysterious. Always carrying around in our body the dying of the Lord Jesus, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in us. So then death is at work in us. We already know that, right? We know death is at work in us every time we go, well, this sucks in life, right? Whatever it is we're going through. He says, death is at work in us, but then he says this, but life is at work in us also. And then he says this, therefore, we do not lose heart. It's tempting. times. Therefore, we do not lose heart, because even though our outward man is perishing, our inward person is being renewed day by day. I don't know if placing the journey of the Magi just into the beginning of the new calendar year was intentional on the part of those early Jesus followers, but it just seems so fitting to me to stand here at the beginning of this new year on Epiphany with the Magi, so to speak, and consider the journey we've been on and the journey before us, because this is the journey where the one who holds our longing, our pain, the promises spoken in our lesser joys, our confusion about who we are and how to do life. This is a journey with the one who holds all these things. And having come to Bethlehem and lain all these before him as we looked upon his face, though we are not all the way home yet, to me, I can tell you everything looks different. Our outward man is still perishing, dag nabbit. But our inner person is being made new, day by day by day. And that is my prayer for your journey this year. That you might hold on to the light of the glory of God in the face of Christ in 2025. And by that light be able to see. And in seeing, be able to become. Let's pray. Sometimes, Lord, I think I want all the mundane things that everybody around me seems to think make a life. And then I see your glory again in the face of Christ, in the people around me, in the splendor of creation, in so many places. And I don't just want to fill my life. I don't want to just build my life out of the mundane little building blocks. I want to become. I want to journey with you. I didn't know where that journey was going to lead all those years ago. And if I'm honest, I don't know exactly where it's going to lead from here. But I know this. I'm not who I used to be. And someday I'm fully going to be who you made me to be. And for that journey, I am eternally grateful.